issues of contemporary literary theory, because our topic, our area was literary theory and literary criticism. So now let's discuss what all are the basic issues concerning literary theory. First of all, we must understand what is contemporary theory. Contemporary theory deals with certain guidelines to appreciate, assess, evaluate, perceive, and analyze literature. And contemporary literary theory helps evolve a kind of method to carry out literary criticism of a particular literary text. Now, this contemporary literary theory questions whether language can ever represent the reality. So, contemporary literary theory begins to question whether language can represent the reality in a literary text. And this contemporary literary theory was very much influenced by the post-structuralist critics such as Jacques Derrida. And it is Jacques Derrida who created a revolution, who revolutionized the domain of literary criticism by saying that meaning is unstable, meaning is not fixed, meaning varies from time to time. Any literary text has multiple layers of interpretation. Any literary text has multiple, meanings. So one cannot claim that whatever interpretation he is making, that is final. So it is Derrida who challenged the structuralists, who challenged the new critics, and established his own opinion, put forward his own views by telling that the meaning of a literary text is unstable. It is not fixed. It is subject to change depending on the context. And yesterday we have analyzed the play, Shakespearean play like Hamlet. We have also analyzed Samuel Beckett's play, The Waiting for Godot. And we have also analyzed poems like Daffodils and poems like Tiger, where we have found the meaning of a particular text begins to change, begins to vary, and it depends on the contextual reference. So contemporary literary theory believed that literature is less as a mirror of reality, but more as a site of discourse. Contemporary literary theorists believed that literature is less a mirror of reality, rather it is a site of field of discourse. In other words, literature wants to convey something. Literature wants to send some message to the society to bring about change, to bring about reformation in the society. There are critics like contemporary literary critics like Roland Barthes. Remember Roland Barthes, who wrote a beautiful essay entitled The Death of the Author in 1966, which also created a revolution in the domain of literary criticism. And he said, hey, once the literary text is created, the author is dead. And author has no connection with the literary text. While analyzing and evaluating the text, we should never make any reference to the author. Author, for all practical purposes, is a persona non grata. We can't consider his position, his historical background, his personal career, his growth as a writer, etc., etc. His personal life. Well, we have nothing to do with that. What we are supposed to interact, what we are supposed to analyze is the literary text itself. How the text appears, what is the language, what is the symbolism, what is the ambiguity, what is the paradox, what is the image, simile, metaphor, all these things are supposed to be discussed. Julia Kristeva also emphasized that a text is never autonomous. It is always a dialogue with other texts. Roland Barthes also maintained that instead of discussing the writer, we should make a discussion, or we should try to explore other texts so that we can get some clue for understanding. So, Julia Kristeva, the contemporary literary critic, and Roland Barthes, both of them argued that while analyzing a text, the elements of textuality and intertextuality should be taken into account. What is intertextuality? Textuality is okay. You will analyze the text. What is intertextuality? Intertextuality is you have to make reference to other texts so as to get some clue to understand this text. So both of them argued that a text, instead of being an autonomous entity, it is rather related to or independent on other texts. Such type of opinion, undermines the originality, the authorship, and the shifting focus to the networks of meaning. Anyone may feel that perhaps any text lacks originality. Rather, it is just a kind of, It's a kind of follow-up action by another text. It's a kind of replica of another text. It's a kind of imitation of another text. That's what Julia Kristeva and Roland Barthes argued. They said that a text should not be viewed independently, autonomously. Rather, it should be viewed in connection with other texts. Then the contemporary literary theorists, they argued that it is up to the reader to construct the meaning. Quite natural. You have already studied Jacques Derrida. You have already studied Roland Barthes. Both of them argued that text should be analyzed as per the perception of the reader, not the author. The reader should try to bring out the meaning of the text. And whatever meaning he brings out, that is okay for him. And others cannot challenge that this meaning is wrong. No. Any meaning churned out by any person, any reader, is supposed to be correct according to Derrida. Because Derrida believes that there is not a singular meaning of a particular text. There are multiple meanings of a particular text. So the essay, The Death of the Author, written by Roland Barthes, also highlighted that the reader is very important and his interpretation of the text is final, not the interpretation made by the author, because author has no role to play. Author is dead as far as Roland Barthes is concerned. There are other critics of contemporary literary theory, critics of reader response group, reader response theory. The pioneers of reader response theory, who are they? Stanley Fish, Wolfgang Iser. Stanley Fish, Stanley Fish, and another person is Wolfgang, Wolfgangiser, Wolfgang Iser and Stanley Fish. They focused on the active role of the reader's interpretation. Julia Kristeva, Roland Barthes, Jacques Derrida, they opined that reader is important, reader's interpretation is final. So also Stanley Fish and Wolfgang Iser, they opined that reader's interpretation is final. Whatever the reader says, that is authentic. Such type of opinions create so many questions. The questions relating to authority, the questions relating to interpretation, the questions relating to plurality of meaning. Obviously, because when the contemporary literary critics like, Jacques Derrida, Roland Barthes, Julia Kristeva, Stanley Fish, Wolfgang Iser, they gave primacy, importance, priority to the reader, and they believed that the interpretation of the reader is important. Author has no role to play. Author is not important. At that time, they believed that the reader is important. And whatever interpretation is made by the reader, whatever evaluation is made by the reader, whatever assessment, whatever assimilation is made by the reader, whatever perception is made by the reader, that counts. Not only that, because Derrida has already said, if there is no fixity of meaning, a particular text may have multiple meanings brought out by multiple readers. One reader may talk differently from another reader. There may not be any coordination, any harmony between the interpretation of two readers. But you have to accept everything, because no text has a fixed meaning. Derrida said, the meaning is not fixed in a text because signifiers are not fixed. He criticized Ferdinand de Saussure. Ferdinand de Saussure talked about signifier and signified. Derrida accepted it. He said, okay, signifier and signified are there. But at the same time, you must remember that signified varies. Signifier remains constant. But you can't say for each signifier there is only one signified. No. For one signifier, there may be more than one signifiers. As I gave you the example of a chair, Chair is a signified, and chair is a piece of furniture which has 4 legs, sitting space, and 2 hands. We call somebody, please pull the chair and sit down. At the same time, while addressing a meeting, we address the chair. Honorable chair, ladies and gentlemen. Like this, we start our address. While making a reference in the meeting to the chair, there the chair doesn't belong to a piece of furniture, doesn't refer to a piece of furniture. It refers to the chairman or the president of the meeting, the person who is presiding over the meeting. So in that connection, Derrida said, the signifier may be constant, but signifier varies according to context, according to situation. In every situation, the signifiers used to vary. So that is what Derrida said, that signifier may be constant, signifier may be one, but signifiers are different and signifiers begin to change. So that is why you have to find there is pluralism of reading, and many readers may make many interpretations because the meaning is not fixed in a particular text. So the contemporary literary critics, they talked about and they began to question the authority. Who is having authority over the text? Does the author exercise any authority over the text? Does the reader exercise any authority over the text? Does the critic exercise any authority over the text? Who is having the authority? Actually, the contemporary literary theory believed that the reader is having immense authority over the text, because a host of critics, starting from Derrida, Roland Barthes, Julia Kristeva, Stanley Fish, Wolfgang Iser, everyone believes that reader has the choice, reader has the privilege, reader has the authority to make the interpretation of a particular text. There can't be two opinions about it. So, the contemporary literary critics and the contemporary literary theorists, they believe that literature is also connected with ideology. The ideology which is talked about by Louis Althusser, the Marxist critic. Literature is connected with power. Literature is connected to the culture in a particular context. So literature has affinity with three things. One is it is connected with ideology or connected to ideology. The ideology which was talked about by Louis Althusser, the Marxist critic. And literature is also connected to power. Literature is also connected to culture. So, ideology, culture, and power are the three elements which we find got reflected or get reflected in literature. The Marxist critics, post-colonial critics, feminist critics, queer theory critics, critical race theorists consider the text as a site for resistance of dominant ideologies. Sorry. They resist. Who used to resist? Critics like Marxist critics like Louis Althusser, Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Antonio Gramsci, Raymond Williams, Terry Eagleton. They oppose the dominant ideologies. Feminist critics like Simone de Beauvoir, Helen Showalter, Helen Sixas, Julia Kristeva, they also oppose the dominant ideologies. So, this kind of attitude challenges the autonomy of the text. Where do you find the autonomy? The autonomy is lost because the reader is given all the power. The reader is given the license, the right, the legitimacy to interpret a particular text in his own style. And the critics of contemporary literary theory, they have already accepted what should be the approach of a reader. What should the reader do? In which way should the reader interpret a particular text? They believe that the reader has the legitimate right, the reader has the authority to interpret the text in his own style, because the meaning of the text is not fixed. And everyone should understand that. And the theorists or the critics of Marxism, post-colonialism, feminism, queer theory, they oppose a particular ideology which is dominating the world during their time. So, text has lost its autonomy, and the autonomy is transferred to the reader. The autonomy is transferred to the critic. So what we find, the text speaks of what? Who actually speaks in the text? And whose voices are projected? And whose voices are marginalized? We have to notice, we have to take note who is the speaker in the text. The characters, the protagonist, the representative character is trying to resist the dominant ideology, is trying to raise his voice against social superstition. The protagonist is raising a revolt against the authoritarian rule which happened during the French Revolution in 1789. The feminist writers or the feminist critics, they talk about the marginalization of women, exploitation of women, and they raise the voice for women empowerment, for the liberation of women. They put their thrust on the woman's character, and they consider a woman as the key figure in the family. She should never be ignored. She should never be marginalized. Her voice should never be throttled. She should be given a chance to be listened to. The feminist critics, like Ellen Showalter, Simone de Beauvoir, Helen Sixtus, and the post-colonial critics like Edward Said, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, and Homi K. Bhabha, and the critics of queer theory, Butler and Sedgwick, they begin to question how literature constructs as well as deconstructs identities. They look upon literature as a powerful platform, as a very strong platform which creates and deconstructs the identities, which offers the identities, constructs the identities, makes the identities possible. At the same time, it also, you know, deconstructs the identities. And they consider that the subject is no longer stable, but the subject is fragmented. It is put down into pieces. It is cut into pieces to serve the greater purpose of social benefit. They project the characters in such a manner which will serve as an eye opener for the society. Say, for example, the case of women marginalization. The author will project the women in such a manner so that the character of women is highlighted, and that woman character carries her legitimacy, she carries her importance, she carries her priority. Not only she carries priority for herself, but she carries the priority for her community. So the literary canons during contemporary literary theory, or the literary canons within the domain of contemporary literary theory, made attempts to include a few features. What features they wanted to include? First thing is they wanted to include the element of marginalized voices. Which voices are not listened to? Who are the people exploited? Then they introduced popular culture, the oral tradition. They included within the ambit of literary criticism three things. One is the marginalized voice, second is the oral tradition, and the third is the popular culture. Contemporary literary theory does another wonderful thing. What is that wonderful service rendered by contemporary literary theory? It blurs the boundary. It removes the boundary between high literature and mass culture. It wanted to ensure that mass culture is reflected in great literature. If you want to call some literatures as great literature, you should make sure that it reflects mass culture, majority culture. And at the same time, it should make efforts to represent all cultures for that matter. Not only does it represent the culture of a single community, it should make effort to attempt and bring about a universal culture or universal representation to all cultures, so that no community feels marginalized. Another thing is noticed in contemporary literary theory, because the global issues and local issues are dealt with in contemporary literary criticism. In other words, local issues are considered as part of the global issues. For example, in India, something happens. It should be highlighted as not only an issue typical to the Indians, but it should be highlighted as an issue which is typical to all the human beings across the globe. In other words, the typical issues of a particular community or a particular country should be treated as a global issue, universal issue, so that a human issue, so that each community, each country gets equal opportunity to ventilate its grievance. Now, the postmodern relativism, which talks about ethics, morality, rationality, wisdom, empathy, responsibility, justice. So, in contemporary literary theory, we find the issues of ethics are raised in literature. In other words, literature becomes a platform, becomes an instrument of reformation. Literature enlightens people, makes people empathetic, makes people realize the problems of others, the pain of others, the anguish of others, the agony of others, and accordingly, they should behave in a human society. So questions were asked if literature is adequate to foster the elements of empathy, elements of accountability, elements of justice, elements of rationality, elements of responsibility among the people through literature. Apart from the enlightenment aspect, there is also another aspect in literature according to contemporary literary theorists. The critics of contemporary literary theory believed that literature has, of course, another dimension, and that dimension is aesthetic dimension. Every literature has two aspects. I have told you from the beginning, it has the entertainment aspect, it has the enlightenment aspect. So the contemporary literary theorists, they also believed that literature makes an attempt to bring about a balance between the aesthetic aspect with the moral aspect, with the enlightenment aspect. So there is a blending between entertainment and enlightenment. There is a blending between the aesthetic aspect, and the moralistic aspect. Nowadays, we are passing through the digital age. And in the digital age, we come across AI generated text, artificial intelligence generated text, social media, hypertext, and thereby it creates a kind of apprehension that it may challenge the traditional notions of author, text, and reader. You have AI generated platforms now. Text, most of the AI generated texts are available now. So as a result, the contemporary literary theory critics or the critics belonging to the contemporary literary theory, they become apprehensive about the possible challenge, apparent challenge caused by the AI generated text, the social media, the digital text to the traditional notions of author, text, reader, critic, evaluation, interpretation, assimilation, reception, etc. Theories of cyber culture, digital humanities open new possibilities for interpretation. So nowadays, there is cyber culture, there is digital humanities. Through cyber culture and digital humanities, new possibilities are found for interpretation. Interpretation could be made in a different manner by the application of cyber culture, by the application of digital humanities. So, in a way, you may say the contemporary literary theory is shaped by, is managed by, is organized by the literary theories like deconstruction, feminism, reader response theory, Marxism, identity politics, digital culture, artificial intelligence, ethics, aestheticism, morality, etc. And they always question how texts can be more viable, more rational, more meaningful, more useful to bring about changes in the society, to bring about changes in the attitude of the people. So, this is what contemporary literary theory used to talk about. Now, let's discuss postmodernism. What are the basic features, the salient features, the characteristic features of postmodernism as a critical theory? First of all, let's know what's the historical background of postmodernism. Postmodernism originated or emerged in the middle part of 20th century, and postmodernism originated as a reaction against postmodernism. You must always remember that postmodernism as a critical theory emerged as a reaction against modernism. Modernism believed in the features like order, progress, reason, universal truth. What are the basic features of modernism? The basic features of modernism are order, reason, progress, and portrayal of universal truth. But postmodernism challenged all these features. It challenged all these features and it had its own features. It put emphasis on plurality, relativity, and fragmentation. Try to understand the difference between modernism and postmodernism. Modernism focused on order, progress, reason, universal truth. Remember. Postmodernism focused on plurality, relativity, fragmentation. So there is a great deal of difference between modernism and postmodernism. Postmodernism opposed the ideology fostered by modernism and it wanted to put forward its own ideology. Postmodernism rejected grand narratives. The pioneer of postmodernism was Jean-François Lyotard. Jean-François Lyotard, a French critic. Jean-Francois Lyotard. Jean-François Lyotard. So he said, there is nothing what you can call universal. There is nothing what is called universal dealing with progress, enlightenment, Marxism, or even objectives of science. Rather, there is relativity of truth. Truth should not be viewed as absolute. On the contrary, truth is relative. You cannot say it is universal. You cannot say it is absolute. Rather, it is relative. And truth is constructed by language, culture, and power. Another postmodernist critic, Michel Foucault, Michel Foucault, Michel Foucault, he said, truth is not absolute, but it is constructed by language, culture, and power. So for getting the truth or for arriving at the truth, you should focus on culture, power, and language. The postmodern critics believed that the texts mix high culture with low culture. Parody, pastiche, irony, and self-reflexivity. What do they do? The texts use the blending of high culture with low culture. They deal with parody. They deal with pastiche, copying and pasting. They deal with or make use of irony and self-reflexivity. The postmodernist critics, they also highlighted that there is fragmentation in the narratives. The narratives are not moving in one direction in a full way. Rather, there are fragmentations. The narratives, according to them, are fragmented, disjointed, distracted, open ended. They are non linear, they don't move in one line, they stray away from the line. If you go through the novels of Salman Rushdie, if you go through the novel of Thomas Pynchon, there you will find how the novels used to appear fragmented. If you go through the famous novel, the noted novel of Salman Rushdie, The Midnight Children, there you find how you don't get a focused attention of the narrative. The narrative appears to be digressive. If in one chapter he has talked about Salim Sinai, in the other chapter he has talked about freedom movement. And he uses the technique of magic realism while narrating the plot of the novel. Apart from fragmentation, the postmodernists believe that in the text there is intertextuality. What is intertextuality? Julia Kristeva talked about intertextuality. Means the writers used to borrow some ideas from other texts. All the ideas incorporated by the writers in their novels or plays or poems are not their own. In other words, they borrow the ideas, they borrow the thoughts, they borrow the situations, plots from other writers, which they call intertextuality. Then there is deconstruction. Elements of deconstruction. Postmodernists also appreciate the views of Jacques Derrida. They appreciate Jacques Derrida so much so that they feel, they see or they notice there are the elements of deconstruction in the postmodern texts. Because the texts don't have a fixed meaning and they don't have a fixed interpretation. In any manner you start interpreting a particular text, it appears convincing. So he says there is no fixed meaning of the text. There is no fixed interpretation of the text. Interpretation varies, meaning varies according to context, according to situation. Then it is said, the postmodernist critics, they believe that there is hyper-reality. The element of hyper-reality in the postmodern texts. Media replaces reality. The virtual world dominates the real world. Critics like Jean Baudrillard, they opine that media make such type of advertisement that people are carried away by such virtual platform. So there is simulation, there is hyper reality, and the dominance of virtual world instead of the real world. People are taken away from the real world into the glamour and luster of the virtual world through media bleeds. The postmodernist critics, they say that there is metafiction. Metafiction is that which comments on its own artificiality. So metafiction is noticeable in postmodernist age. There is also the element of pastiche and parody. They mix the style. They copy and paste. They borrow certain features from other writers and present it as their own. They also use the technique of magic realism. Who? The postmodern writers or the writers in the postmodern age, they make use of magic realism as a technique in their fictions. Who are the writers who used magic realism? I have already told you, Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie used magic realism technique in his novel Midnight's Children. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez used magic realism technique in his book 100 Years of Solitude. Gabriel Garcia Marquez used magic realism technique in his book 100 Years of Solitude. Then we also notice in postmodern texts collage and experimentation. They break the boundaries between genres and forms. Different genres are united and formed a collage, putting together different genres, different forms, different techniques, and they make or indulge in experimentation. The postmodern critics talked about certain ideologies, depiction of certain universal morality, depiction of the distrust of institutions, portrayal of certain ideologies, and the portrayal of universal morality. The postmodern texts are found to deal with certain values, certain beliefs, certain knowledge which are socially constructed and socially acceptable. In the postmodern age, the writers put emphasis on the science, the images, and the spectacles over reality. They talk about reality less but talk about images more. Talk about unreal things more. Because they are carried away by the virtual world, by the social media, by the AI, artificial intelligence. However, postmodernism celebrates multiplicity, appreciates the theory of deconstruction enunciated by Jacques Derrida, talks about multiple layers of meaning in a text, and at the same time, it rejects the universal truths. It puts emphasis on the fragmentation of reality, and it is carried away or influenced by the media bleach, the advertisements, the glamorous world, etc. We will now switch over to psychoanalytical theory. Psychoanalytical theory pioneered by Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan. Freud and Lacan, Jacques Lacan and Sigmund Freud, both are very renowned psychoanalysts. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, Sigmund Freud was very popular. His ideas explain how the unconscious desires, repressed memories, and inner conflicts shape human behavior, human creativity, human action, human conduct, human character, human psyche, etc. Remember the fundamental thing about Freudian psychology. Sigmund Freud believed that the unconscious plays a major role to determine the unconscious desires, the repressed memories, the inner conflicts, and study how the unconscious desires, repressed memories, and inner conflicts are influencing, are impacting human action, human behavior, human conduct, human character, human psyche, human approach, human attitude, human philosophy. So, the unconscious desire, repressed memory, inner conflict are very important as far as Freudian psychological analysis is concerned. Sigmund Freud talked about or discussed the hidden part of the mind which stores the desires, the fears, the repressions, the memories, etc. So this part is called the unconscious. In other words, What is unconscious? The unconscious is the hidden part of the mind. Remember, according to Freud, the unconscious is the hidden part of the mind to store the desire, the fear, the repression, the memory, etc. Then he makes an attempt to define the dream. What is dream? Dream, according to him, is a royal road to the unconscious. Dreams lead to the unconscious. The unconscious desires, repressed memories, and inner conflicts. Dreams also reveal the disguised wishes.
Mm.
The wishes which are disguised are also revealed by the dreams. Sigmund Freud also highlights the three aspects of human mind or human psyche. Every human being has these three aspects. Remember, this is very important. The first aspect is called the id, 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 note it down. The second aspect of human mind is ego, ego. The third part of human mind is superego. So id, ego and superego, they determine the human mind. So what is id? Id is the instinct, the pleasure principle, the instinctual drive. You feel like doing something, you do it immediately without thinking about its future or without thinking about its pros and cons. That is the id. Then comes the ego. Ego is the element of rationality. Ego makes a consideration whether it is proper to do it or not. If I do it right now, what will be the consequence? If I don't do it, what will be the consequence? Then comes the superego. The superego is a moral compass. Superego gives the warning. If don't do it. If you do it, things will be serious. And your total career will be damaged. So you don't do it. So superego is the element of morality, the element of ethics to guide a human being properly. Then Freud talks about Oedipus complex. Yesterday I have explained to you what is Oedipus complex. Oedipus complex is a male child's unconscious desire for the mother and his rivalry with his father. In other words, a child's unconscious desire for the parent of the opposite sex and rivalry with the parent of the same sex. Then he talks about repression and sublimation. Freud says literature and art often arise from repressed desires. If you have repressed desire, literature is created. Literature also emerges from the repressed desires sublimated into a symbolic form, and the outcome of the symbolic form is literature or art. And Freud believes that the authors, the writers, can be analyzed through hidden motives. The texts may be read as dreams, symbolic, distorted, and revealing the unconscious truth. And the bright example is, yesterday I gave you the example of Prince Hamlet. Why did Hamlet make delay to murder the murderer of his father, or to kill, or to take revenge against the murderer of his father? Because he was passing through Oedipal conflict, and he was a victim of Oedipus complex. Because Hamlet, since his childhood, had fostered a hidden desire to have physical union with his mother, Gertrude. When that was not fulfilled, he was dissatisfied, and he even was very much envious of his father, because his father was very much loved by his mother. He wanted that the love of his mother should be monopolized by him, not his father. His father should not take any share, for which many a time he has contemplated to kill his father. During his childhood, Hamlet many a time has contemplated to kill his father, because he looked upon his father as a rival, as a villain in the path of his love for his mother. When you come to Jacques Lacan, Lacan, Jacques, a French critic, Jacques Lacan, he interpreted the theory of Freud through linguistics and structuralism. And he focused on language and subjectivity from psychoanalytical point of view. He said a child has a mirror stage, and when a child first stands up in front of a mirror, he forms his own identity. Sorry. He forms his own identity and discovers that it's me, it's I. That is his ego. But soon after that, Lacan says that the child experiences alienation. Such type of alienation creates a lifelong tension between his self-image and the reality. So the child, standing in front of the mirror, discovers his identity, that it is he, which gives rise to his ego. Then he feels alienated from the reality, and he finds a huge gap between his image and the reality. So, Jacques Lacan believes that desires and dreams are expressed through metaphors and symbols. The unconscious is structured like language. Freud talks about the unconscious desires. Freud talks about the inner conflicts. Freud talks about the repressed memories. Similarly, Lacan says that the unconscious is structured like language. Dreams and desires are expressed through metaphors, symbols, similes in literature, and the images can be of three types. One is imaginary, second is symbolic, and the third is real. Three types of images or metaphors are reflected in the text. One is imaginary, next is symbolic, and next is real. So the human beings are driven always by desire. There is no doubt about it. Every human being is driven by desire. But desire is never fully satisfied. There is always inadequacy in the fulfillment of desire. No one's desire is fulfilled. And desire is something which is unlimited. Because wants are unlimited, desires are unlimited, so desires are never fulfilled. We find that there is lack of fulfillment in the desire. And we find, according to Lacan, the self is fragmented. The self is never found as a whole. It is fragmented. It is always mediated by language and others. So Lacan says self is fragmented and the same self is mediated by language. The literary texts reveal about the gaps, the absence, lack of fulfillment of desire. The characters are driven not just by repressed desire, but by the linguistic structure of desire. The modernist and postmodernist texts are fragmented voices. Postmodernist texts are never wholesome voice, rather fragmented voice. They also reflect the idea of fractured subject. So this is how Lacan and Freud talk about human psyche, talk about literature. Freud focuses on the author's psyche, the character's psyche, as well as the reader's psyche. Whereas Lacan focuses on the literary text as a network of signifiers, symbols, structures to express the fragmented self. Now, we'll switch over to post-colonial theory. As you all know, post-colonial theory emerged as a critical theory in the domain of literary criticism when the writers belonging to the countries which were colonized by the Western powers. So the writers of those countries are called post-colonial writers. And the key figures, the pioneers of post-colonial criticism are Edward Said, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, and Homi K. Bhabha. Edward Said wrote a path-breaking book, a legendary book, the title of which is Orientalism. It was published in 1978. Edward Said's book, Orientalism, was published in 1978. In this book, he discussed how the West constructed the Orient as an exotic, inferior, and backward other to justify colonial domination. Edward Said discussed in his book Orientalism that the Western powers, they considered the Orient or the people who were under the colonial dominance used to be inferior, used to be exotic, used to be backward, for which they were colonized. It means the Western powers or the colonial powers, they wanted to justify that whatever colonization they were doing, they were justified. Because such type of people, they deserve to be colonized. Such type of people, they deserve to remain under the control of another superior power. And according to them, the Orient or the countries living in the West or belonging to the East are inferior, exotic, and backward, for which they need to remain under colonial domination. Orientalism is not just a scholarship, but it's a discourse which produces power relations. The West's representation of the East were stereotypical because the Western powers or the colonial powers, they depicted the Oriental powers or the colonized powers as inferior, exotic, and backward. So they represented them in a very irrational, passive manner, and they presented their own people as very much cultured, very much progressive, very much civilized, very much rational. So the book Orientalism, which was published in 1978, it launched post-colonial studies by showing how knowledge, culture, and power are interlinked in colonialism. Knowledge, culture, and power. There is a link among the three: culture, knowledge, and power. Orientalism highlighted the political representation and it challenged the Eurocentric epistemology.
it is impacting both the expenses and the revenue. Right? So I still need to make a decision on that. I think from the full scope of maintenance is not within the expenses one. So it might be like you end up handling.
Then there is another post-colonial critic whose name is Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. She had written a book named Can the Subaltern Speak? There are, three books such as The Orientalism, which was brought out in 1978, and another book was brought out, Can the Subaltern Speak? It was brought out by Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak in 1988, and there is another book called The Location of Culture, which was brought out in 1994 by Homi K. Bhabha. So in Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak's book, Can the Subaltern Speak? She exposed that both Western intellectuals and nationalist elites for silencing the subaltern. Who is the subaltern? The most marginalized people. Who are they? The peasants, the workers, factory workers, wage earners, the untouchables, the women. And she began to question to the Western intellectuals, why should the subaltern be silenced? The subaltern cannot speak because their voices are always mediated or appropriated by others. She said, Spivak said, that the subaltern cannot speak because their voices are mediated. For example, the Britishers interpreted sati as barbarism, needing reform, while Indian elites framed it as a tradition. Neither allowed the widow's own voice to be heard. So she has given an example, the abolition of sati right. The Britishers abolished sati right. Indians considered as a tradition, but they never gave any scope to hear the widows. What is the reaction of the widows when sati right is prevalent? Spivak also introduced strategic essentialism, a temporary adoption of identity categories. For example, women who are colonized, they are temporarily adopted for the sake of identity, but they are never given good treatment. So Gayatri Spivak's book, Can the Subaltern Speak, contributed in a big way, and it emphasized
Yeah.
the marginalization of the poorer section of people, the proletariats, within both the colonial and post-colonial discourse. Then there is another post-colonial critic, Homi K. Bhabha. Bhabha talked about the location of culture. His book, The Location of Culture, was published in 1994, in which he focused on cultural hybridity, mimicry, ambivalence. Bhabha said the colonizer and colonized identities, they mix up. When the identities, both the identities of the colonizer and the colonized, they get mixed up, a new identity is produced. And what is that identity, new identity? That is the hybridity, hybrid identity. Then there is, he talked about mimicry. Colonized subjects, they began to imitate the colonizer's culture, but almost the same, but not quite. This resemblance undermines colonial authority by exposing its instability. The subjects who were colonized, who were closer to the colonizer's culture, they began to imitate the culture of the colonizers. Then Bhabha talked about ambivalence. He said the colonial discourse is never stable. Colonial discourse simultaneously desires and fears the colonized. Sometimes it exploits the colonized people, and sometimes it is also afraid of the colonized people. So Bhabha shifted the focus from domination to resistance through hybridity and cultural negotiation.
Sir, can you please repeat the last sentence, sir?
He showed how post-colonial identity is not pure, but it is shaped by hybridity,
मैं आता हूँ
mimicry,
यार,
ambivalence,
इमाद बुला रहे, कॉल में आता हूँ।
negotiation, minimality.
Sir, Imad is calling us.
So when Edward Said focused on the representation of the Orient or the colonized nations, Gayatri Spivak focused on the subaltern voices, and Bhabha, Homi K. Bhabha, focused on identity, culture, and mimicry. We'll then switch over to cultural studies and neo-historicism. The cultural studies as a critical theory emerged in Britain in the middle part of 19th century. Say from the 1960s onwards. And cultural studies as a critical theory is constituted of interdisciplines. Taking so many disciplines into consideration,
Yeah.
cultural discipline has been formed. So this was primarily noticed or constituted at the University of Birmingham for Center of Contemporary Cultural Studies. And this Center of Cultural Studies was founded by the pioneer of cultural studies, whose name is Richard Hogarth. This Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies was constituted under the
ये कहीं पे लिख
leadership,
गया आप?
under the initiative of Richard Hogarth in the year 1964. And Hogarth wrote a book, a very noted book, very popular book. The name of the book is The Uses of Literacy. And this book, The Uses of Literacy, was published
भाई मैंने फिग्मा फाइल भेज दिया, आप एक बार रिव्यू कर लेना।
in the year 1957.
ये देख अपना लोगो
The Uses of Literacy,
अपना के लिए भी
Focus
लोगो
on-
डिजाइन बनाना है अपनी वेबसाइट के लिए।
the study of working class culture.
कार्तिक भाई
जी भाईजान।
Hogarth
हो गए कौन है?
focused on the culture of the working class.
पूछो यार।
How do they manage?
और
How much
यार
do they
रिव्यू कर
earn?
देना यार।
Where do they go?
उस दिन
How
की
do they
तरह करो।
maintain their family? How do they address various socio-cultural, political, economic issues?
उस दिन की तरह करो।
What are their liabilities? Those things were discussed in the book The Uses of Literacy. Then there is another cultural studies critic named Raymond Williams.
भाई कार्तिक भाई
Raymond Williams emphasized
हाँ बोलो।
on
बॉक्स सारे हो
culture
गए आज के पूरे बॉक्स आपके?
as a whole way of life
बाकी
and
बोलो
he
ना,
linked
आज
culture
कंप्लीट करो उसको, लेट
to
हो गया, ठीक
Marxism.
हाँ
ओके।
Raymond Williams
अरे
सर
भाई
आपके
कोई
बॉक्स हो गए पूरे?
connected culture to Marxism. Then there is another cultural studies critic, Stuart Hall. He expanded the contours of cultural studies and treated media, race, identity, globalization as the ancillary factors. So Stuart Hall studied cultural studies as a compendium of race, identity, media, and globalization. There is another critic of cultural studies whose name is E.P. Thompson. He wrote a book. The name of the book is
I think there is a ghost in the class.
The name of his book is The Making of the English Working Class. The book was brought out in the year 1963 and which discussed the social history, the class consciousness in the contemporary society. Cultural studies
क्या गंद लोग हो यार, बंद करो ना भाई, चले जा रहा है तुम लोग का।
शर्म वरम है कि नहीं? कुछ सिखाया है कि नहीं पेरेंट्स लोग? जा जाके पंचर बना जाके पढ़ने दे हम लोग को।
हाँ भाई सही बोल रहा है ये।
ये थोड़ी पढ़ने के लिए इधर आए हैं।
What the hell is happening in the class? If you don't want to read, you can leave. Why are you just wasting any other time?
So cultural studies focuses on everyday life, popular culture, subculture, media, music, fashion, etc. Cultural
Sir, can you
studies
speak
was
little bit
influenced by
loudly?
Marxism and the theory of hegemony enunciated by Antonio Gramsci. It was also influenced
Hello,
by
sir.
feminism, post-colonialism, and post-structuralism. The central idea of cultural studies is
Hello.
that it is not just art and culture, but it is a site of struggle over meaning, identities, and power.
आवाज नहीं आ रही सर।
बस तेरी अपब्रिंगिंग पता चल रही है, क्या सिखाया है तेरे माँ बाप ने पता नहीं, यही अपब्रिंगिंग समझ में आ रहा है।
क्या बोल रहा भाई? आवाज नहीं आ रही भाई। ओ यार गाने बंद कर दो, पढ़ने दो मेरे को। अरे आई।
Then we switch over to neo-historicism. Neo-historicism is a critical theory which emerged in the United States of America during the 80s, 1980s.
मजा नहीं।
And neo-historicism as a critical theory is associated with Stephen Greenblatt. Stephen Greenblatt is the pioneer of the most popular literary theory, the most accepted literary theory, most talked about literary theory, that is neo-historicism. The key figures are, apart from Stephen Greenblatt, there is another person who influenced, Stephen Greenblatt. It was Michel Foucault. Stephen Greenblatt talked about the Renaissance self-fashioning. He wrote a book named Renaissance Self-Fashioning, which was published in 1980, and he wrote another book which was published in 1990, Learning to Curse. Greenblatt was influenced by Michel Foucault and Clifford Geertz. So neo-historicism considers literature and history as interdependent. The critics of neo-historicism, they consider literature and history as complementary to one another. They reject the old division between text and context. Rather, they suggest that a text should be viewed in the particular context. Without the context, the analysis of the text is the effective way of analyzing, evaluating, and assimilating
मैंने
a
जाके
text
रेस्ट लिया
is
उसे मेरे फ्लो
to
तुझे
analyze the
क्लास
context.
किया लिविंग लाइक आई लॉस्ट इट लाइफ इज अ गिफ्ट मिया दिमाग से मैं पूरा कमर के लिए मैं स्टिक लिया जो बोलता लिरिक्स में कसम से मैंने सब किया बात मांगे मुझसे को नेटवर्क दिया
That literature is timeless or autonomous. Neo-historicism rejects the idea that literature is autonomous, literature is timeless. Rather, the critics of neo-historicism, they believe that literature is linked to context, text is linked to the context, literature is linked to the history and culture. New historicism uses historical anecdotes,
Your tech buddy, please mute yourself.
archival documents, cultural practices, along with the literary text. So, the new historicists, they never analyze the text in isolation. What they used to do, they used to take up historical anecdotes, archival documents, and cultural practices, along with the literary text for its evaluation. New historicism emphasizes
राजवीर वर्मा भाई आप ऐसे क्यों कर रहे हो?
ideology and marginal voices in history.
राजवीर वर्मा भाई आप ऐसे क्यों कर रहे हो?
The method that new historicist critics adopt
काला फर ही था ना?
मुझे तो ऐसा ही दिखा। क्यों?
is known as cultural poetics.
शिकार की खोज में निकला हो?
Studying literary text in relation to social energies, cultural codes, and historical practices. How do they study? They study the literary text in relation to
Fabi मगर मैं बता रहे मैं भी बहुत बड़ी जवानी बच के उठ सरकार वाले कल्ला का तारो पीने का शब्दों का रात जो दीने जो मई तारो पीने
economic structures of Elizabethan England. So, there is a great connection between cultural studies and new historicism. What is the connection? The connection is both cultural studies and new historicism reject the autonomy of literature. They never accept the view that literature is autonomous. They never accept the view literature is timeless.
कृतिक भाई कैसे हो?
They are of the opinion that literature is related to the history, the culture, the context of its own times. Cultural studies as a critical theory was greatly influenced by Marxism.
Please contact your tech buddy for website, app designs and app development.
Marxism
Please
focused on
contact your tech buddy for
brand new, and they plan to have a kid. बंदे के
the
लाइफ
lack
में
of
किसी का कोई
fixity
असर नहीं
in the meaning of the text.
लेकिन असल में घर वाले बंद नहीं
The meaning, the text doesn't have a fixed meaning. Rather, the meaning of the text is subject to change. A text is subject to multiple interpretations.
Multiple.
You can have the interpretation of a particular text in your own way. Another person may have the interpretation in his own way. And you can't challenge it. You can't say that your interpretation is authentic and his interpretation is wrong or inauthentic. No, you cannot say like that. You have to adapt it. You have to accept it and consider that whatever interpretation is made by him is as correct as the interpretation made by me. Cultural study focuses on contemporary culture. It focuses on the media. It focuses on identity politics, class distinction, while neo-historicism focuses on literary text in the historical context.
नक लग गई है। कमाल है दारू का, और सामने ही है हमारे पिछले मौसम का दुश्मन। हम सभी को इसी की तो तलाश थी, है ना? एक भूरा भैंसा हमारे इस जंगल में आज तक का सबसे बड़ा, खातिर और सबसे खतरनाक। इसे हराने के लिए पूरे झुंड की जरूरत पड़ेगी। हम जितने हैं काफी है। जल्दी आओ, इस बार उसे दबोच लेते हैं, कहीं वो फिर से ना भाग जाए।
और उसके झुंड को वो सफेद तो
अरे नहीं, तुम ऐसा सोचोगे मत रक्षा।
समझ नहीं आ रहा, तुम सबको भैंसे की बू आ रही है, पर मुझे तो उनके पैरों के निशान ही नहीं दिख रहे
The
हैं।
context is very important, and unless the context is taken into consideration, to analyze the text is well nigh difficult.
Hello, sir.
Cultural studies was influenced greatly by Foucault, who talked about the essence of knowledge.
Hi, Ritika.
How knowledge is very important.
Why
And
sir
how
is not talking to me?
Knowledge is power.
Why sir is not talking to me?
If you have knowledge,
अरे अब
you have
मेरी
everything.
तारीफ मत करो, मैं तभी कुछ
If
खास
you
नहीं
don't have knowledge, you are nothing.
मुझे फोन करवाओ।
So what you need to do is, you must enrich your knowledge. How do you enrich your knowledge? You have to study the context of a particular culture. When the context of a particular culture
तुम्हें ऐसी डरावनी चीजें नहीं
is taken
देखनी
into
चाहिए। ऐसा
consideration,
करोगे तो तुम्हें
at
अकेले
that
में बहुत
time,
डर लगेगा बेटा।
you find
ये तो बस एक मूवी है, मुझे
the
देखने दीजिए ना।
context is analyzed properly, and the context determines the meaning of the text. The context determines the rationality of the
मुझे
text,
तो उनके पैरों
the
के निशान ही
justification
नहीं
of the
दिख रहे हैं।
text,
शायद तुम
the interpretation of the text.
जितना तुम खुद को समझते हो ना।
So cultural studies focuses on contemporary culture, the historical background, media, class, identity politics, whereas neo-historicism focuses on the historical context, the historical background, and the meaning of the text. In other words, they feel that the critics of neo-historicism, they believe that unless the historical context comes to the fore, unless the historical context is taken into account, you cannot properly evaluate the meaning of the text. You cannot evaluate the intention of the text, the purpose of the text, the tone of the text, the tenor of the text. So everything depends on the context. Neo-historicism believes that the meaning of the text becomes useful when the context is analyzed properly. The context should be highlighted in the right perspective so that the meaning of the text is evaluated properly. The neo-historicist critics also focus on the cultural aspect of the particular time. What was the prevailing culture when the text was written? What was the attitude of the people? Whether there was a liberal mind or there was a conservative atmosphere. People were living in a miserable condition.
और हवाई जहाज तो कभी आया नहीं।
And literary text, when it is viewed from
ऐसी बात है
the
मंत्री जी,
context of history
कि
and
जब मैं
culture,
छोटा सा था तो मेरा
it
बाप
appeals
हवाई
to
जहाजों के नटपुट
many aspects and it appears very much relevant. The proper
क्योंकि किसी
study,
को
the proper review, the proper evaluation is possible only when you take into account the historical context. Without the historical context,
solutions. It's not good.
the text loses its relevance.
Rajveer.
On the other side,
Who is
cultural
Rajveer?
studies focuses on the
Rajveer.
culture of the particular age, the media of the particular age,
We can't hear anything, sir.
the identity politics,
Sir, can you remove this guy, please?
the class distinction,
ये तुमने क्या मुझको क्या उसको इकरार
but if you make a
These
very
guys are
objective
very
study,
disturbing.
if you make a very impartial,
Miss Ritika Soni,
dispassionate,
please be quiet.
Allu Ram.
and rationalistic study,
Allu Ravan.
I will not be quiet.
you would notice that both the critical theories,
Once I swallow the bug,
such as
be quiet.
neo-historicism and cultural studies, both were influenced by Marxism and post-structuralism. Marxism influenced them
बस यार.
to highlight the distinction of two classes. Who are the two classes? The
Class
bourgeois,
1 and class 2.
the
कुछ नहीं
rich
कर पाए
people,
भाई ऐसे क्या.
and the proletariats, the poorer
सारी
people,
चीज जाएंगी ना भाई. मैं तो फोन बंद कर दूंगा भाई. आज नहीं हो
the
रहा भाई.
exploiters and the exploited, the industry owners and the industrial workers, the factory owners and the factory workers.
कार्तिक कर
Both of
सकता है.
them are discussed. And what element is discussed?
कहाँ है
The
कार्तिक?
relation between them. The economic condition.
कार्तिक यार.
In that
Karthik
connection,
bhai.
Marx talks about
Sir, just
the
one second.
concept of base and superstructure.
हमें म्यूट ही कर दिया क्या?
Marx always focuses on
पता नहीं यार हम बात कर रहे हैं यार पता नहीं अब
the
बुरा लग
condition of the base, the
please
concept
listen to
of
us.
base, the concept of superstructure.
So one
And he
second, let us
says,
complete first. Your tech
unless there is a base, there cannot be a superstructure.
Sir,
Hello.
The base Marx refers to
sir,
the economic condition.
Hello, sir.
The economic condition is very important.
Hello Rajveer.
If the economic condition is good,
Rajveer.
Hello, Sumit.
you know, the life will be good.
Rajveer
The
bhai.
progress will be good.
Rajveer
The
bhai.
professional
Rajveer bhai,
flourish will be
Rajveer
good.
bhai, Rajveer bhai,
And a
Rajveer
person
bhai,
will not
Rajveer
have
bhai,
any
Rajveer bhai,
kind of
Rajveer
problem.
bhai, Rajveer bhai, Rajveer bhai,
And the
Rajveer bhai,
society at
Rajveer bhai,
large
Rajveer bhai, Rajveer bhai.
shall also grow, shall also flourish
Rajveer bhai,
if
Rajveer bhai, Rajveer bhai, Rajveer bhai,
the
Rajveer bhai,
economic
Rajveer
base
bhai,
is very
Rajveer
strong.
bhai, Rajveer bhai, Rajveer bhai.
But on the flip side, if the base is weak,
Siri.
the superstructure is not possible. Superstructure is only possible when the base is very strong. So Marx talks about the base and superstructure, and he says
आज किए भैया आपका लाज.
the base considers or the base determines the strength of the superstructure, the duration of the superstructure. The superstructure can last for a longer period if the base is strong. You may take the example of a building.
Hello.
Supposing it is a 3-storied building and the foundation is not strong. If the foundation of the 3-storied building is not strong and there is a tornado, cyclone, high wind, at that time it would happen. The building will be affected and the building will collapse. The building will collapse because its foundation is not strong. The building will collapse because its base is very poor. Its base is very weak, for which it has collapsed like a house of cards. And new historicism, critical theory, they were greatly influenced by the theories like Marxism and post-structuralism. As far as post-structuralism is concerned, Derrida believes that there is no fixity of meaning. You can't say that this is the meaning of the text. Otherwise, on the other hand, on the contrary, the text is subject to multiplicity of interpretations. You may have more than one meaning of a particular text. Cultural studies evolved from sociology, neo-historicism evolved from history and literary criticism. So both literary criticism, history,
One second, this is very wrong.
along with
No,
them,
I'm not happy with this. No, one second, please. One second. No, no, this can't happen. One second. No, please, one second. No, what are you talking about? Please, one second, please. Hello, hi, hello.
critical theories emerged. One is cultural studies, the other is neo-historicism. Cultural studies focused on the culture of the country, the culture of the writer, the culture of the time, whereas
We lost.
neo-historicism focused on the historical context.
We lost, sir. We lost.
And the critics of neo-historicism, they wanted to place the text
हम कुछ नहीं कर पाए.
along with the
हम एक दिन
context.
कुछ करेंगे सर. हम एक दिन कुछ
They said
हम आएंगे वापस.
the text
हमारा नाम था एसएमएक्स
cannot
क्रिएशन
be
सैयद टेक बडी.
appreciated
बस हमारा आज तक यही था.
unless the context is taken into consideration. So text is very important only when the context is taken into consideration.
Sir, please use context.
Without
because
context,
the context people make
text
sure the
cannot
data is
be
persistent.
analyzed properly. Cultural studies focused on the cultural condition. Neo-historicism focused on the historical condition, the context against which the text is written. So neo-historicists always emphasize that a text should be viewed in the context. In order to make a proper evaluation of a text, the context should be taken into account. By isolating the context, you cannot get the proper meaning of the text. You cannot properly evaluate the text. We'll stop here. Thank you very much. Your MEG-5 is totally complete. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
You take by. कोई है इस क्लास के अंदर? हेलो, कोई है इसका क्लास के अंदर अभी भी? हेलो, is anyone there?
Yes.
हम क्यों ना एक साथ हमारा आखिरी में कंप्लेंट कर देते हैं, क्योंकि हमारा टाइम पैसा सब कुछ अभी बर्बाद हो रहा है।
जी मैम, बिल्कुल सही कह रहे हैं, मैं भी यही सोच रही थी। ये लोग खुद पढ़ते नहीं और दूसरों का टाइम भी वेस्ट करते हैं।
ये मुझे नहीं लगता ये कोई पढ़ने वाला कोई है, ये सिर्फ कमल सर का क्लास ही लाइक चूज करता है डिस्टरबेंस करने के लिए। सही है ना? बाकी सबका क्लास में तो इतना प्रॉब्लम तो है नहीं था।
नहीं था, बिल्कुल नहीं था। ये ना उनकी जो आरसी भुवनेश्वर है वही कंप्लेंट करनी पड़ेगी कि ऐसा कुछ सीन है। अगर आप वो देख सकते हैं, उनके पास कुछ कंट्रोल्स हैं तो वो कुछ कर सकते हैं। तो
सर तो अपना मैक्सिमम तो हमें हेल्प कर दिया, पर अभी
बिल,
सब लोगों का ये नौटंकी भी चल रहा है और हम कुछ भी नहीं कर पा रहे हैं। लाइक
बिल्कुल।
हेल्पलेस। मैंने भी गया यहाँ आरती में वहां जाके कंप्लेंट किया, फिर भी कोई
अच्छा,
फायदा नहीं है।
मे बी वो अभी प्रेजेंट ना हो वहाँ पे, बट सम सॉर्ट ऑफ ईमेल से अगर भेजा जाए तो वो एक्शन देंगे कुछ ना कुछ।
नहीं, वहां से मैंने 3 मेल आईडी लेके आया था और हम सब लोगों ने उसमें कंप्लेन लिख के भेज दिया था, पर कुछ
अच्छा।
भी रिप्लाई नहीं मिल रहा है। उन कॉल करेंगे तो उठाएंगे भी नहीं, और हम कंप्लेन करेंगे तो रिप्लाई भी नहीं दे रहा है। और मैंने वहां जाके पूछा तो ये बता रहा है कि ये एक आदमी के ऊपर केस चल रहा है। आखिरी से बता दिया कि ऐसे नौटंकी कर रहा है क्लास में, और इग्नू के नाम पे कोई और
हम्म।
लाइक असाइनमेंट चाहिए, ऐसा कुछ लिख के हमें हमारा पूरा डिटेल्स, ईमेल, फोन नंबर सब कुछ लीक हो गया है इग्नू से।
अच्छा।
और उसके बारे में कुछ शायद
हेलो
कंप्लेन चल रहा है अभी।
हेलो
हाय।
या good evening all. I have a class now with new literatures of English.
ओके।
So are you from first year?
या वी आर फ्रॉम फर्स्ट ईयर।
Okay. Okay, so I will be taking your class on new literatures in English, that is MEG-8.
सॉरी सर, वी आर फ्रॉम नॉट MEG8।
Yeah, I think right now I have. Which class do you have right now?
Our class is just over.
Which class you had?
We had
Uh,
the MEG-5.
MEG-5. Okay.
Yes.
So you people have MEG-8 right now?
No,
no,
we
no,
don't
sir.
have it.
Okay,
Sir,
okay.
we have a complaint to report. We are our last past 7-8 class was very disturbing class, and some people were totally distracting our class and making noise and everything. We were not able to hear a single word from our last past classes. We need
They
to
are
give a
just
complaint,
playing.
proper complaint, and we need a reschedule of the last MEG5 class. Please, sir, we are very much helpless.
Okay.
We visited the
I'm
RC
giving
near
you an
our home. We have given emails, everything, but still no reply. No one is taking the call. We are so helpless.
whom did you give the complaint?
To the email RC, to the RC, we emailed it, the complaint.
No, no, I'm giving you the email ID of one of the um, coordinate means of the region of the one of the um, deputy directors. You can email him and he will respond.
Okay, sir, can you please share that in the message, sir?
Yeah, just a minute. Just hold. I'm just giving.
So we are from very different places, and we are somehow managing our time, and we are not even able to listen a 5 minutes class.
Okay, okay. You can just write a complaint to him, and he will, take care of this. Just a minute, I'm sending you.
My messages are not opening. Can somebody take the email and send it in the group?
It's
Okay,
the same from here also.
the chat is closed from the host side.
Okay. Also,
Uh,
very new.
I
They
can
must
call.
nuisance was sending in the chat.
Yeah, what I'll do is I will call you the email ID.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, please write down. It is SK.
चैट बंद कर दी है
AFK.
Yeah, S for Switzerland.
Okay.
Okay, K for kite.
Okay.
Panigrahi. Panigrahi.
PANI
GRAHI.
GRAHI. Okay.
Yeah, @igno.ac.in.
No. Ignu
AC.in.
dot in. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you can mail Panigrahi sir, and he will take care of this.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
नहीं खाया इंग्लिश